Welcome back, and thanks for joining us for another episode. Today we're going to talk all about compensating controls, and this is new terminology for me. I've never heard those words in that order.
Yeah, that's cool, Sophie. I was hoping you had not heard of this. Compensating controls, my goodness, compensating for what? Well, here's the deal. Compensating controls, and we like to even break down security control categories into further delineations, and we're going to share a bunch with you that you should know. But what we're talking about here, and in fact, they're sometimes called alternating controls, and the reason they're called alternate or alternating controls is we can't get the security we want through traditional mechanisms. So a real great example of this might be, we don't want just username and password security, so we end up installing a compensating control like a smart card reader. So now we've enabled multi-factor authentication, right? Where someone has to have something, a smart card, and they have to know something, their password. So compensating controls are a huge area in cybersecurity. And as we're gearing up to really delve into incident response, we should be familiar with these type controls. So they are, as I said, compensating for other, or for a security aspect that we can't implement another way. Now, to make this really make sense, let's talk about some of the specific categories of compensating controls we have. And one of them you probably are really thinking of when you hear a security control is a preventative control. So we're trying to limit the possibility of some undesirable outcome. Now, Sophie, I hope you will appreciate this. I hope our students appreciate this. What I did for each of these controls was I went in and made sure to give examples. So when you think preventative controls, you're probably thinking like, ooh, firewalls and IPSs and things of that nature. Well, sure, but how about just things like policies, like segregating duties inside of the organization? Isn't that a preventative control, compensating for just the fact that humans are involved in the process?
Would that also account for stuff like least privilege, principal least privilege and stuff like that?
Beautiful. Yep. I could have gone on and on here. Sophie nailed that least privilege concept. Remember, Sophie, when you join the security team, they're going to create probably 4 or 5 accounts for you. And those accounts will have varying levels of privileges. They might have a Sophie _user_ management account. And that's what Sophie's going to log in with when she needs to do user management. And by the way, it wouldn't be called that, right? That's too describing of what that user account is. It'd be Sophie _ and then some digits that she recognizes as her user management account. So great stuff. Those preventative controls. Another one I have down there is password policy, right? We have to have a password policy in place because oftentimes the technology doesn't allow us to restrict passwords the way we want them to. Another area of compensating controls that's important is managerial controls. They're going to be policies and procedures typically in order for us to achieve our security goals. Notice there's a lot of kind of blending here, Sophie, in that you could argue that an acceptable use policy is really a preventative control. So don't get too caught up in, well, is an acceptable use policy a managerial control or a preventative control? You don't have to worry about that too much. And in a certification exam environment, especially for CompTIA, they're not really going to try and trick you there. The control will really conveniently fit into one of the categories. They shouldn't be too difficult there.
In real life, is there maybe some overlap that happens between these two categories, or are they generally pretty separate?
In actual life, we would separate them into one of the buckets, just how we want to define it. Okay. You know what I mean? Within our organization.
But it maybe depends on the organization, how they might define things?
Completely.
Okay.
So once again, Sophie, one of the tricky things here, when we talk security controls, we're talking in general, and then when you get in a company, they may categorize them a different way. But certainly from an exam perspective, just categorize things the way Sophie and I are categorizing them. And then when you get in your organization, be ready to be flexible. Here's one that we love. Well, we don't love these. They're corrective controls. Yikes. This means something probably undesirable did happen. And we're going to talk a lot about these types of controls, obviously, as part of incident response. So what would be a great example? Are you laughing at my old school tape that's come unwound?
It's a little funny.
Yeah, it is. Going old school there for sure. But keep in mind that could be tape backup, right? That's that's actually what that is. It's a tape backup, and you could certainly have that go awry on you. And why did I put tape backup on this slide? Well, because a great example of a corrective control would be backups and restoring from those backups, as well as things like recovery tools and IPS. You know what that stands for, I bet, Sophie?
Intrusion prevention system?
Intrusion prevention system. You better believe it. Now, why would that be a corrective control? Well, think about it. Typically, what organizations do is they have a firewall at the edge, and then behind that firewall, they'll have an intrusion prevention system. So this is corrective, isn't it? Because the attacker made it through the firewall. They made it through the firewall, they hit the intrusion prevention system, and that takes the corrective action. Now, one of the things I wanted to share with our students today, and we're going to do this towards the end here, is I'm going to show you how there are ways now to practice with many of these controls, and it's thanks to freeware, for lack of a better term, sites that allow you to practice with real equipment. So I'll show you how you could get practice with an intrusion prevention system coming up in this episode. But we've got more categories of controls to worry about. How about operational controls? These are going to be implemented by humans. So operational means humans have to get involved, not automated systems like an IPS would be automated. This would be things like process reviews, security awareness training. And boy, we cannot downplay the importance of that. Operational controls like security awareness training, they're absolutely critical because we know phishing and vishing and smishing and all these types of attacks, they are preying upon the human element. They are going after social engineering style of attacks. These are often missed by systems. So this is when human training needs to come into play. Here at ACI Learning, we are sending out now false phishing attacks to see who needs that additional training, who is clicking on those phishing emails, and these are the type programs that would fall under our operational controls. Now, everybody's favorite on the security team is the technical controls because we all love technology to solve things on the IT security team. So this is going to address the use of technology to solve stuff. This is where we have our encryption that we are using. And remember, when we say encryption, we are interested in three kind of surfaces, right? We're interested in encrypting data at rest, encrypting data in use, and encrypting data in transit. Let's not forget about all three of those. You see gaping security holes when one of those is omitted. Maybe someone takes a bunch of data, puts it in an S3 bucket in the cloud, and fails to encrypt that data at rest. Maybe they've encrypted it at rest and in use, but when it's being sent from one location to another, it is not properly encrypted. So we have to worry about all those kinds of points. Here's a fun one. I say fun because it would be so easy to get this one right in an exam environment, wouldn't it? It's a detective control. So a detective control is seeking out those vulnerabilities, trying to catch things through a detective process. And this is one of my favorite areas because one of my specialties is in Splunk, and Splunk would be a great example of a detective type control. We could set Splunk to alert us to some log message indicating a security breach, and we could be alerted instantly about that security breach. I put trend analysis there because that's one of my favorite ones too. Sophie and I were discussing 0-day attacks and how frightening they are, because the 0-day attack, it's a new attack. There is no documentation about that attack. It's brand new on the scene. And one of the most fascinating things about that is students always say, well, what possibly could we do about that? If it's not in your antivirus software definitions, if it's not in your firewall rule definitions, this bad thing that just got invented, how can we possibly stop it? One of those things is trend analysis. You can have Splunk-like systems monitoring your environment, and they know what's normal. So if they see any parameters going out of the normal range, they can alert you that you might have a 0-day situation, and you can start reacting in time. Pretty cool.
Good to know your baselines for traffic and things like that, so that when something weird does happen, it's easy to pick out.
Oh my gosh, Sophie, you got it. Baselines are hugely important. They really are. And I love that you understand that at this point in your training. Without a baseline, you're cooked. And by the way, it's not just about security, as you realize. It's also about performance, right? So someone will say, our internet is slow. And you need to know, well, what is slow? If you don't know what their internet access is supposed to be like, you're going to be in big trouble. So let's baseline, and more baselining for performance, for security, for reliability. We should have baselines on all of that.
It's like you go to get blood work done regularly, so you know what your levels look like.
That's exactly right. That's a great analogy. Chris Ward, one of our trainers here, he has some blood pressure issues. He would tell you that himself. And so he has a cuff where he can take his blood pressure. So he took his blood pressure in front of me. And then I ran down to Walgreens after work because I was paranoid about my blood pressure naturally. No reason to be. Just, that's how I roll. So I go down to Walgreens, test my blood pressure. Those numbers meant nothing to me, Sophie. Because I have no baseline of what I'm supposed to be. I even went to the pharmacist and said, am I okay? And he goes, I don't know. Get out of here.
If you don't know what your normal looks like, you don't know what your weird looks like.
Right. That's exactly right. He said, get out. You're weird. All right. So next up is responsive controls. Yikes. These are the ones we hope don't get used all that often. These are the controls that are triggered when there is an attack. So they are in response to an attack. They're obviously hugely important, but like I said, we hope they don't get triggered all that much. What would be an example? A snapshot restore, or maybe the full-blown incident response cycle that we're going to be taking you through in some upcoming videos. So responsive controls, part of that control list here. Sophie, as we went through this, I realized this is probably a really good area for flashcards because there's a lot of these controls, and some of them, like managerial versus operational, those might be kind of tough to distinguish. So flashcards could definitely help if you are preparing for certification.
Because we went through 6 or 7 types, right?
Oh, yeah. There's, 6 or 7 there, and they can get kind of jumbled in your head. So definitely flashcards would be great. Well, I wanted to end this episode with a demonstration of something I know Sophie's going to love. Sophie's quickly going from kind of the academic cyber study, right, to where she's going to want to start getting her hands on different security controls and see how they operate. So here you can see I am at developer.cisco.com. Sophie, what you can do is you can go up to cisco.com, the parent company, and you can establish a free account with them, a free cisco.com account. Once you have that, you come back here to DevNet, as you will find it in Google, the developer network at Cisco. You go to DevNet, you log in, and you'll see that they have sandboxes. And these sandboxes are filled with their high-end even equipment that you're going to get to access and experiment with for free. So this is a great example of how we can get hands-on practice with these security controls today. Here you can see I've launched a DNA Center from Cisco. What the idea is behind the DNA Center product is that it can automate typical functions, including security functions that you might need to perform in the network. And as you can see, they give us a free complimentary sandbox that we can access. So now I'm in that DNA Center sandbox. And if I go up here and I click on, for instance, tools, and I want to see my topology, for instance, as you'll see, it's going to bring us into our network topology on a map here. And notice here's building 1. We can zoom right down into that building and we can see the Cisco devices that are inside it. Here is a Cisco switch, a Catalyst 3850 24 port switch. And of course, we could manage that switch from here, and we could start working with the equipment and experimenting with some of these great security controls that might be quite expensive, quite elaborate, but it's not impossible for us to work with them and get valuable hands-on experience.
Especially because it's good to know all of the facts of everything, and there are some things you might need to memorize as far as definitions and things like that, especially for exams. But when it comes to getting into the real world on this stuff, it's good to get hands-on practice and what this actually looks like. So it's great to have sites like this to kind of demonstrate.
It really is. And, DNA Center, it's not like it's all that difficult to set up. But again, it is on the pricier side. So we love to be able to access this stuff free of charge.
Yes, all for the low, low price of free $99. We love to see it. So thank you for walking us through some more information on compensating controls. Got to take a look at, I think, 6 or 7 different types of controls you'll need to be aware of. And of course, got to see that cool demo at the end of, you called it DevNet, right?
That's right. That is Cisco DevNet. And that's one of many places where you can get that complimentary hands-on practice.
All right. So maybe do some Googling and look at some other tools and check out this tool as well. But I think for now, we're going to go ahead and sign off. So thank you for walking us through that, Anthony.
My pleasure.
And thank you for joining us for this episode. We'll see you next time.